Father O'Malley went through a harrowing experience or two today, but he's here and we're delighted. A colleague of mine returned a few days ago from Rome with the photos that you see behind me. And we have, if you haven't seen these on the internet, we have a John Carroll student holding up a John Carroll shirt, and we have the Pope thumbs up sign towards John Carroll University. If you visit our website, which I encourage you to do for all of the wonderful programs that we have scheduled, you will see this on our website. My colleague, the colleague who gave me these photos, mentioned that at the General Wednesday audience that day, the Pope spoke in Spanish and Italian. Only those two languages, he said. But many of us know that the Pope speaks one very important language that we seldom hear from popes or from anyone else in authority. The Pope is gifted, he is fluent in the language of friendship. He speaks it in words, he speaks it in gestures. His affectivity range is off the charts, which explains, at least in part, the attraction so many people have for him. The Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that 12.2 million people are on the Pope's Twitter account. Father John O'Malley of the Society of Jesus is tuned into friendship and language, as a matter of fact, so that he was able to tip us off about 30 years ago as to how the language of the Second Vatican Council differed from the language of previous councils. It was pastoral, not juridical. It was personal, not triumphal. It was of the people, for the people, by the people. In fact, after I read these statements from Father O'Malley, I checked the Vatican documents, the Second Vatican Council documents, and I found the word friendship and its cognates, friendly, friend, friendship, are mentioned 25 times in the documents of the Second Vatican Council. At Trent, by comparison, the words are mentioned 6 times, but in an entirely different spirit. Father O'Malley is in a class all his own as an historian of the early modern church, as an author of impeccably researched books, and I'll tell you 2 of my favorites. Actually, there are several of my favorites, but I guarantee that if you take a look at and read The Early Jesuits by Father O'Malley, I promise you it's a page turner and you will not be able to put it down.
Some have done that.
Teacher, lecturer, winner of the most prestigious awards that the academic world can confer, the recipient of more honorary degrees than anyone needs, except for the honorary degree from John Carroll University that he cherishes dearly. You can find all of this information, his books, his articles, his degrees, his honorary degrees, and his awards on the internet, and I leave that to you. Instead, I would like to introduce Father O'Malley in a way that I've never introduced anyone before. and that is to introduce him in his own words. On the Georgetown University website, Father O'Malley, as everyone else at Georgetown, has his own page. And he was asked several questions, and I am going to report to you how he answered them. These are all in his own words. What are your interests? Answer: things Italian, which means history, art, and especially cuisine, thus traveling in Italy. Things French when I'm not intimidated by them. Cooking, opera, with Puccini at the top of the list, followed by Mozart. Ballet, gimme them Russians for this art. Poker, hanging out with friends, especially when they take me to nice restaurants. Movies, used to be a beach bum, but not longer. Father O'Malley, what are your favorite books? Well, to be honest, I like my own a lot, but I suppose that doesn't count. But it does, because this is a man of great taste. Back to what he said. Most recently, I loved The Age of Innocence and am ashamed I'd not read it before. As a kid, I read Gone with the Wind 7 times, but tried again recently and could not get through more than a few pages. My 2 favorite movies: Tree of the Wooden Clogs, Italian of course, and Gosford Park, which I've seen at least 5 times. I also like trashy movies such as John Waters' Hairspray and Polyester.
Did I say all that?
Yeah. Father O'Malley, what are your favorite sayings? He has 2. 1, to God, quote, "Let me let you love me. Let me let you in." The 2nd, to mortals, he says, "The difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between a lightning bolt and a lightning bug." It's a quote from Mark Twain. Things I hate most. What are they? The question was asked. Pretension, especially when I discover it in myself. Is it any wonder that I chose this New Yorker cover to introduce Father John O'Malley? The picture on the screen behind me reflects a person, Pope Francis in this case, with an awful lot of joie de vivre and a freedom that invites admiration. These qualities do not diminish. No one thought it improper. No one thought it embarrassing. No one thought it disrespectful to picture the Pope this way. They thought the artist nailed it. This is the person we have as Pope. These qualities of joie de vivre, freedom, do not diminish, but rather enhance a person of intelligence, wisdom, and grace. It's an irresistible combination, and it reflects not only Pope Francis, but our next speaker. And I ask you to welcome him, Father John O'Malley.
Thank you, Doris. Most of that was a good introduction. I'm very glad to be here, and awfully glad because I almost didn't get here. My title is really, we have a pope. It gives us a reason for hope to fit it in with the Grace series. Can you hear me back there? All right? Yeah. Let me talk a little bit about myself and Pope Francis. I happened to be in Rome just by accident. I was there for something else just a year ago, and was in Rome when he was elected on March the 13th. Was I in the Piazza of St. Peter when he was elected? No. I was in a restaurant. But I repented that. Also, I think we met each other about 35 years ago in Rome because we were both together at a meeting, a general congregation of the Jesuits, 1974, 1975. He was there and I was there. I don't remember him at all, and I'm sure he doesn't remember me. So that's my whole personal connection with Pope Francis. I'll sort of divide what I have to say tonight in what I call 4 firsts about him. I think Father Niehoff already mentioned some of this. The first is the first pope from the New World, the first pope to take the name Francis, the first Jesuit pope, and the first pope in 50 years not to have participated in the Second Vatican Council. So what? So a little bit of his chronology. I don't know what's gone before this evening, but you know, in the 6th grade, he was in a Catholic school, and then he went to a sort of a technical high school where he got a certificate, a diploma, as a chemical technician. Then as a young man, very young man, he worked for a while in a commercial firm, and in the evenings, occasionally as a janitor, as you know, sometimes as a bouncer in a bar. Then he entered the Jesuits about age 21, 22. As a scholastic, that is to say, during his training, he taught high school, which is our plan, and he taught literature and psychology. Well, not philosophy or theology, but literature and psychology. I think that's important. Then he was ordained, and then, excuse me, something went down the wrong way. Maybe I'll have this. Then after he was ordained, he was master of novices. That is to say, he trained the young men just entering the Jesuit order and had them under his care for 2 years. He did that for several years. It's extremely important. Then he became provincial, as you know, at a very young age, was provincial for 6 years, and then became the rector of a very important Jesuit school in Argentina. After that, seems to have gone through some kind of a great big spiritual crisis, and sort of, I don't know what it was, maybe somebody here does, can describe it, but at any rate, felt he was kind of exiled, he felt exiled, and then became auxiliary bishop of Buenos Aires, and then finally archbishop, and then finally pope. So what about a few comments on that chronology? What I find interesting is that as a teenager and a young man, he had a very secular occupation and was out there in the world. And as I say, he taught literature. And in that apostolic exhortation of his, The Joy of the Gospel, it's amazing. He does have a good knowledge of literature as well as of music and other things like that. So he was not living in a clerical cloister. And Buenos Aires is a very sophisticated city. A lot of sophisticated cities in the world, but that's the kind of a city he grew up in. A certain freedom. Let me compare him with other recent popes. Paul VI entered a seminary as a very young boy, and his whole training was clerical. Then he worked in the Roman Curia. It's fine, but it's a very kind of restricted background. Pretty much the same for Pope Benedict XVI, who did have that little stint in Hitler Youth, which he had to do by law, and then a very brief period in the German army at the very end of the Second World War. But other than that, his life was lived in a clerical atmosphere and an academic atmosphere, and then moved to Rome, where he was in the Curia for some 30 years. Pius XII, the same way. Grew up with a very clerical family, clerical training all the way, papal diplomatic corps, and so forth. One pope who's a little different, and what about John Paul II? Yes, well, as a young man, he was certainly out in there in the world. He wanted to be a playwright, and so forth, was fighting the communists. But then he lived in an atmosphere of a totalitarian state where a church with a united front was absolutely crucial. And he had no experience of Western democracy for all its advantages and disadvantages, all its loss and gain. So he had a very different background, and this was reflected, I think, when he was Pope. Someone who was a little different was John the 23rd. Well, you'll say, no, John the 23rd, I mean, he entered the seminary as a young boy, was in clerical circles all his life. True. But he spent 10 years as apostolic delegate in Bulgaria, a basically Orthodox country where Catholics were a very small minority, and where he got on well, learned how to get on well with the Orthodox there. And then 10 years in Istanbul, in a Muslim country, where he had to make his way. Very few Catholics, very few Christians even. So then to Paris as nuncio, but after the Second World War, which was a very difficult time for the French church. De Gaulle was on the warpath against about 30 bishops whom he believed had collaborated or been too friendly with the hated Vichy regime, the pro-Nazi regime in southern France. And Roncalli was there. He does not seem to have been the main broker in sort of settling that thing, but he knew troubles, and knew big troubles. So Francis is often compared with John the 23rd. I think very well, it's very well done, as I'll try to show a little bit more later. Master of Novices. This meant he led these young men through the 30 days of the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. In many ways describing the spiritual exercises, but one is a inner journey, finding oneself especially in relationship to God, in dialogue with these young men. I think that's a very crucial piece of his history that shows as Pope. He was provincial. It's no secret that he was highly criticized, and he was a worry to the Jesuit Curia in Rome. One of the Father General's chief advisors at the time was a wonderful French Jesuit, Yves Calvez, and he had to do a lot of the dealings with Bergoglio as provincial. So some years later, when Bergoglio was archbishop and Calvez was no longer in the Curia, he did a lot of traveling around, and he said to another French Jesuit, a friend of mine, François-Xavier de Mortier, Bergoglio was a very poor provincial, but he's made an excellent archbishop. And that was before, of course, he was elected Pope, and that was before any of this publicity about him. What about Bergoglio and the Dirty War in Argentina? I think all the accusations that he was complicit with the regime, I think those have all been refuted. And I can ask Bob Mickens, there's this Italian book, La Lista di Bergoglio, Bergoglio's list, sort of playing off Schindler's List. There's a list of all the people that Bergoglio helped during that dirty war. And so we can talk about that a little bit later sometime. At any rate, his style as archbishop, you've read about this, takes public transport, lived in this very modest apartment that was not heated on the weekends. He had to keep the stove going all the time in the kitchen to keep warm. Visited the poor sections of town, opened his cathedral to people of other faiths, and did that incredible dialogue with Rabbi Abraham Skorka, and that was published pretty much verbatim And they ranged over every conceivable issue that you could imagine. And they became excellent friends. And one of the wonderful experiences I had at Georgetown was just a few months after Pope Francis was elected, Rabbi Skorka came to Georgetown. And I had lunch with him, with a little group, and then he gave a talk afterwards for a larger crowd. And what's remarkable is they are really good friends. And the Pope calls him all the time, asking him advice and so forth. And Skorka was in Rome, stayed at the Casa Santa Marta, and Bergoglio said, okay, you sit at my table, you sit at my right hand. And we did this for 5 days, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So, interesting man, our Pope. What about his ecclesiology? His vision for the church? What priorities is he setting? And how does he set them? He chose the name Francis. And then he explained, 2 days later, why he chose the name Francis. For 2 reasons. St. Francis' love of the poor, his love of peace, and his love of nature. I think what Francis did at that point was set 3 major priorities of his pontificate. Poverty is increasing radical gap between the haves and the have-nots. Peace, I mean, this world in which we live, just these days now with the whole Crimea crisis and so forth. I mean, every time you pick up a newspaper, listen to however you access the media, there's some kind of bloodshed going on and fratricide going on around the world. So what is a better priority than that? And then our endangered planet. He, thus, as Professor Donnelly suggested, he's setting really an essentially pastoral vision for the church. And he conveys this by word and by deed. What are his words? First word is Francis. Boy, for me, I mean, that's more powerful than some encyclical. It's right out there all the time. And if you reflect upon it, you can see this is a powerful statement. And it's right in front of us all the time. You have to read a lot of, paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs and try to figure out what's being said. You get it right away. As Father Niehoff was saying, and Doris was saying, I am a sinner. And again, I don't think this is a pious platitude for him. He knows that he's made mistakes, and not just mistakes, but he's done bad things. So maybe thinking they were okay when he did them, but looking back, he sees they were bad things. And boy, I don't know. Certainly resonates with me. I too am a sinner. Maybe you're not. 2 days after he was elected, he had that wonderful press conference. And when it was over, he said, well, I know that many of you are not Catholics, many of you are not believers, but I bless you in my heart, because every one of us is a child of God. Nice vision of the church. Telling priests, and I think not just priests, but every one of us we all have interaction with other people. Almost all of us in some way or other are over other people in some capacity or other. To get the smell of the sheep, to get right down there mucking around with it, and not be in some ivory tower, but to listen to the anguish, listen to the problems, listen to the confused consciences, the disturbed consciences, the questing consciences, and the simple troubles that people have. Because the church is a field hospital. It's not a tea party. It's a field hospital where the wounded come. Aren't we all wounded? I mean, the wounded come. Wonderful, wonderful image. Not to be afraid of tenderness. To priest, deal with tenderness, not sticks. Go to the periphery. Go out. Don't be a navel gazer. Go where there's need, where you're called, where the wounded are. We walk together with our differences. Then on July 8th last year, when he went down to Lampedusa to comfort those African Muslim refugees, sort of left there to fend for themselves, all kinds of tragedy. His complaint then, one of the few negative things out of his mouth, he said, we're condemnation of this globalization of indifference. That, the stock market drops a point and everybody's concerned, but hundreds and thousands of people die, and, well, it's just another day in the office. On Tuesday, the Jesuit community at Georgetown, a Jesuit, very good friend of mine, he did his doctorate at Harvard and lived in the same community with me when I was in that area for 6 years. We got to be very good friends. He's now dean of the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome. And he gave a homily on the gospel for that day, which, as you recall possibly, was Matthew's gospel, the Lord's Prayer, and at the end, the gospel continues in saying, if you forgive others, you will be forgiven. And Peter Dubofsky said, well, what Matthew tries to do is show the connection between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So of all the Gospels, it's the one that has so many quotations and allusions to the Old Testament. So what's the Old Testament? It's very clear. If you do good things, you get rewarded. If you do bad things, you get punished. Pretty clear. How does Matthew, in this passage, very subtly gloss that and comment upon it? Dubofsky said, well, basically, Matthew tells you what it is to be good. To be good is to forgive. To be rewarded is to be forgiven. Takes the old, turns it around. I don't know, I think somehow or other our Holy Father learned that lesson. So I just been talking about his deeds. What about his words? I'm talking about his words. What about his deeds? The famous picture, Holy Thursday, washing the feet of that Muslim woman. What a powerful statement. First of all, what are we supposed to do here on this earth? Wash one another's feet, right? One way or other. That's what we're here for. And here, this Muslim and a woman, not one of the 12 apostles, strong statement. One of his first deeds as Pope was to call the chief rabbi of Rome, try to enter into conversation with him. He plans to go to the Holy Land, as you know, and Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew from Istanbul, the Greek Orthodox Church, came to Pope Francis's installation in Rome. The first time there's been that kind of communion between the Eastern Church and the Western Church since 1059. That's a few years ago. I mentioned Lampedusa, and then his many conversations. So what? Ecclesiology. For him, the church is big. It's a big tent. And it's a tent for sinners. I've come not to save the just, but the sinners. We are born to help others. The title he gives himself, Bishop of Rome. He doesn't refer to himself as the Vicar of Christ. He doesn't refer to himself as the Supreme Pontiff. He doesn't discard those terms, but that's how he refers to himself. This is a step into the role of servant leader. I'll come back to that in a moment. So here's a paragraph I'd like to read to you from On Heaven and Earth, that dialogue that he published with Rabbi Skorka. I think this gives you a good insight into him. We also sense our closeness to all those men and women who, although not identifying themselves as followers of any religious tradition, are nonetheless searching for truth, goodness, and beauty. The truth, goodness, and beauty that is God. They are our valued allies in the commitment to defending human dignity, in building a peaceful coexistence between peoples, and in safeguarding and caring for creation. So that's part one. That's Francis as from the New World, Francis as Francis, sort of trying to build a little ecclesiology on top of that. What about Francis as the first Jesuit? I mean, how Jesuit is he? I think Father Niehoff talked about that. All I can say is I certainly identify with him. He's one of ours. He's one of our own. What he says sort of resonates for me with the Jesuit tradition. What is Jesuit spirituality, growing, of course, out of St. Ignatius? Well, first of all, what are the Jesuits all about? I mean, if you read the correspondence of St. Ignatius, the one phrase that appears on just about every page in some form or other is the help of souls. That is to say, the help of souls and bodies. So it's a helping organization. Helping in body and in soul, helping in this world and in the next world. And to do that, you have to have an organization. But as St. Ignatius so often said in those letters, but you're on the spot, do what you think is best. So there's a certain freedom there and ability to accommodate to the situation and to the audience wherever you find yourself. And I see that very much in Pope Francis. And through the spiritual exercises, to use an old-fashioned expression, to be inner-directed. Of course, being attentive to external objective norms, but being inner-directed. So know what you believe, act on what you believe, and be courageous in carrying out what you believe. And I think Francis has really shown so much courage. Another thing, I mean, I hope you'll forgive me for saying this, but Francis is not churchy. I mean, he's not preoccupied with churchy things. He's preoccupied, I think, with really deep Christian things and with deep human things. And of course, the church is part of this mix, and he's certainly a very devoted person in the church, and he's a very devout Catholic. You know, I hope I have to say that, but to heal the wounds, that's what it's about. It's not about sort of ecclesiastical niceties. They can be helpful, but go to the periphery. That is really a quotation or an idea lifted, first of all, from the more recent Jesuit general congregations directing the society. Okay, go where you're needed. Go out. Don't be sort of too self-contained. But that's also right there from the very beginning with the Jesuits. Our scope is the world is our house. That was the famous saying of those early Jesuits. The world is our house. So go out there. This is Pope Francis, it seems to me. And the expression you've heard so often, therefore men and women for others. So these are, I think, really part of his inner Jesuit reality, which helps explain him and helps me, and I think all the Jesuits I know recognize him as a brother. And I think he fits very much into the ideals of John Carroll University. I think that's what we're aiming at, trying to do. Now here's an interesting aspect of him. He was not at the Second Vatican Council. And he's the first pope in 50 years not to have participated in the council. I think that's an advantage. Why do I say that? I really feel that Pope Paul VI, we don't know much about John Paul I, John Paul II, and Pope Benedict XVI, on some level, we're still fighting the battles of the council. They were carrying some of the wounds of the council, some of the concerns of the council. This is so much a part of their history. It was a absolutely dramatic few years in their lives. He does not have that, had not had that experience. He grew up in Argentina just at the time, just as the council was, he was doing his theology just as the council was finishing. He was able to study those documents, be taught those documents, talk about the council, and sort of get the point, not get mirrored down in some of the particulars and some of the worries that I think came with those people who were actual participants. So I think it's a real advantage. If not, he certainly, by his actions, has, as far as I'm concerned, really got the point of the council. What were some of the big innovations of the council? What were some of the big issues, themes of the council? One was dialogue. So that word was used by Pope Paul VI in his encyclical Ecclesiam Suam, which he published in 1963. And with that encyclical, which during the council, the word got right into the council vocabulary and just becomes almost a mantra in the council. And how does Francis understand dialogue? It's a conversation where you let down your barriers, let down your defenses, and let your heart speak. The purpose is not to convert the other, nor is the purpose to arrive at some kind of a compromise statement. It's simply to understand the other and thus to come to appreciate the other as a human being, as a seeker, as a person of integrity, or a person who wants to have integrity, and so forth. So this is, I mean, that dialogue with Rabbi Skorka, it's extraordinary. I mean, it's inconceivable without the Second Vatican Council, absolutely inconceivable. And I don't know of any other high prelate in the Catholic Church who's ever done anything remotely like it. And that's just one example, because we know that also in Argentina, he was in contact with the Muslims, he was in contact with Pentecostals, he was in contact with the Jews, and carrying on sort of more informal, less protracted dialogues with them. But this dialogue with Skorka went on for months, and then they published what amounts to a verbatim of it. And dialogue is a model of being, right? It's not a technique, it's a model of being. It's how you are, that you want to learn, that you are open to others. So it has all kinds of ramifications. Collegiality. That was the great lightning rod of the Second Vatican Council. How do the bishops, when they act as a body collegially, what is their responsibility for the whole church? How do they share that responsibility with the Pope? That was a technical idea of collegiality, but it's a broader idea, right? It's brother and sister. It's working together. It's cooperating. And it seems to me that's what he's trying to do. And the fact that he's trying to give the bishop synods a little more active, real voice. Seems to me that's the way he's going. Then he established that committee of 8 cardinals to help him in, first of all, dealing with the Roman Curia, but then, say, more general looking at the church and how it's functioning. So, again, he's got the point, it seems to me. Something I mentioned earlier. Another interesting mantra in Vatican II applied to the Pope, to bishops, to priests, and to laity is the threefold priestly function: priest, prophet, and king. What the council does is sort of redefine those terms. Like for prophet, yes, saying the truth, but also doing it in conversation. Priest, yes, but that doesn't mean for priests saying Mass. We all offer the sacrifice of the Mass, everybody. But king, that gets redefined in the council to servant leader. And often, simply the word servant. So it's a radical redefinition of kingship. And I think that's really, again, at the core of what Francis is all about. Power to the periphery. The council wanted to break down some of the centralization in the Roman Curia. It's just gotten more intense, as a matter of fact, since the council. But again, as I mentioned, when Francis seems to want to give the Synod of Bishops a real freedom to sort of be self-determining in a way they haven't been, seems to me that's what he's working at. It's some way to, we're all in this together. It's not, as Pius X said, the Pope tells the bishops what to do, the bishops tell the priests what to do, and the priests tell the people what to do. It's a pretty neat formula, but it doesn't exactly work right. And then finally, to mention the reform of the Curia. This was a big issue at Vatican II, and it got kind of taken off the agenda by Pope Paul VI, but as you know, it didn't go away. And it's very much in the air right now and was a very thorn in the side of Pope Benedict XVI. So he's certainly just the appointment of Cardinal Pell to take care of the sort of the administration and financial management of the Holy See. Boy, that's a powerful statement. But I think there's a bigger reality here for him vis-a-vis the Second Vatican Council. I've been studying that council since I was in Rome during the council, as a matter of fact, 2 years of it. And although my field is early modern Europe, I got dragged into writing and thinking and speaking about the council. And so I've been meditating on the council, you might say, for 50 years or so. Here's the way I now look on it. What the council really was about was reconciliation. If I had to pick one word to describe the council, I would say reconciliation. It was set in this direction by Pope John the 23rd in his speech opening the council on October the 11th, 1962, Gaudet Mater Ecclesia, Mother Church rejoices. And he said, well, here's what the council should do. This should be its object. To show the church to be the loving mother of all, benign, patient, full of mercy and goodness. The loving mother of all, benign, patient, full of mercy and goodness. I think that's what the council tried to do. And what this meant was reconciliation. Reconciliation with a lot of things that were unreconciled. One was what we might call multiculturalism. Here is this Western Catholic Church whose language is Latin, philosophy is Western, theology is Western, liturgy is Western. Very beginning of the council, first document, one of the liturgies said the Catholic Church welcomes into its liturgy the traditions, symbols, and so forth of all nations, all cultures, as long as they're not superstitious. And this idea recurs in the council, so that's kind of a reconciliation. Then there's a reconciliation with the whole idea of change. The Catholic Church doesn't change. Come on. Yeah, I mean, certainly there's this basic fundamental continuity, no doubt about it, but it changes. It has to change. It's alive. And so again, the decree on the liturgy, the first decree of the council, one of the first words it uses is the word change. As the council goes on, it keeps coming back to this issue of change, development, even evolution. So it doesn't solve that problem. It's a very complicated problem, but it says, okay, we've got to face this problem. We've got to be reconciled with the problem. Then obviously the decree on ecumenism, reconciliation with non-Catholic Christians. Some of us who are old enough remember when you were not allowed to go to a funeral in a Protestant church. You could not go to a wedding in a Protestant church, even of a friend and so forth. Well, that's completely changed. So it was a reconciliation. And then with non-Christian religions, reconciliation with the Jews, of course, this was brought on by the growing awareness of the Holocaust. How have we talked about the Jews and then about other non-Christian religions? For me, the big news here is that those two decrees, and especially the one, Nostra Aetate, the one on non-Christian religions, gave the church and gave the papacy a new mission in the world, a mission of reconciliation. This is, of course, very much in accord with the gospel, with the tradition of the church, but never out there so clearly and boldly. And Paul VI, Pope John Paul II, and Benedict XVI, they took up this mission, and it's a turnaround. It's extremely important. And then finally, reconciliation with the modern world. The 19th century, after the French Revolution, the church by and large could find very little that was good in the modern world. The Vatican Council said, no, we're reconciled with the modern world. We're the church in the modern world. We're not church for the modern world. We're not the church against the modern world. We're the church in the modern world. And we have to deal with the modern world. And it's not all bad. So it was a council of reconciliation. It was a council about being the loving mother of all, benign, patient, full of mercy and goodness. And this is then expressed in, as Professor Donnelly suggested, in the council's way of talking. What are the characteristic words of Vatican II? They're characteristic, they're themes. They run all the way through the council. Cooperation, brother, sister, friends, what else? Participation, reconciliation. These are new words for a council. And that's what the council is all about. And it seems to me that's what Pope Francis is all about. Listening to people, listening to everybody. He's so popular. Cover of the New Yorker, cover of Time, cover of the Rolling Stone, Man of the Year for The Advocate, on the cover of Vanity Fair, the Italian edition. Just a recent poll, 95% of Catholics think he's doing just a splendid job and so forth. Why? What is there about him? Well, he's friendly. He tells jokes and he seems to sort of have himself in perspective. Comes out, not pompous, not pretentious, which I hate, except when I'm pretentious. Comes out on the balcony the night he was elected. What's his first word? Buonasera. Good evening. Not very high class, but just right. And then he asks them to pray for him. He tells jokes. He knows about art. He knows about music. He knows about literature. He likes to have dinner with people. These are all very attractive. He's compassionate. We know he's compassionate. He's humble. He knows who he is. He's comfortable in his skin. This comes through. He's genuine. What you see is what you get. And what you get is darn good. He's not slick. He's not intent on projecting an image of himself. You know what he does? And this, for me, is why he's so popular. He calls us to be our best selves. I think that's his real appeal. That sort of no matter where you are, emotionally, religiously, even culturally, you recognize that he's calling you to be your best self. And we need that. And we like that when it happens because we know we need it and it fulfills us. We want to be useful. We want to be helpful. We want to be good. We want to be men and women for others. And that's why he's so popular, I think. To be agents of reconciliation. To be good Christians. And what is it to be a good Christian? According to Matthew's gospel, as I heard on Tuesday, to be a good Christian is to forgive. And what's the reward for forgiving? Being forgiven. So, the title of this lecture series is A Reason for Hope, and I think he gives us a reason for hope. And he teaches us that what the church really is, deep down, is the loving mother of all, benign, patient, full of mercy and goodness. Thank you.
Father John O'Malley, you once again hit a home run for us and enlightened us about precisely the attraction of Pope Francis and his mission to us.